Hello and welcome back to the Shaping Your Success project with the Law Society of Scotland and K Legal. Today I am joined by Fritzi Horstman. Fritzi is the founder and executive director of the Compassion Prison Project, an organisation dedicated to bringing compassion, childhood trauma awareness and creative inspiration to all men and women living behind bars. Fritzi is a firm believer of the power of bringing humanity and compassion to those in prison amongst all corners of the world. Thank you very much for joining us today, Fritzi. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's really nice to be here too.
Fantastic. So we'll just step right into it. And if I may, Fritzi, I would like to start with a little bit more of a personal question, if you don't mind. And you are very open about the trauma, which was an overwhelming feature of your own childhood. What was the landscape of your childhood? And would you say that prepared you or even sort of lit this fire inside your belly for the work that you're doing today?
So the landscape of my childhood was like, I waffled between feeling safe sometimes and then never knowing when an outburst was going to happen. And that was true until my mother died. We would go on vacation and suddenly she's fighting with me. So it was, a child needs to know that they're safe and secure at all times for the brain to develop correctly, for the brain to feel like it can explore the world without consequences. And I never had that feeling. I knew whenever my father got home, I was always like, is he drunk? Is she going to know he's drunk? Is there going to be enough money for our rent? So there was always that kind of insecurity that things were not okay. And I didn't know if I would get hit, if she would criticize me, if she would tell me I was no good. Or she would do that to my sister and I would witness it, or she would say that to my father and I would witness it. So it was a constant gauging of am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And that, I know that transferred into my adult life. I never felt really safe in the world. And now it's getting better. I'm starting to heal a little bit. So that means I think I'm starting to heal from my childhood trauma. My nervous system isn't a wreck, but there's still work to be done. There's still years of unraveling, years of trauma. I was doing a class on death row yesterday and the men there, but I said to them, I said, your past is done. Today is all we have. Right now is all we have. Who are you today? Who is the person that you are today? And today is another opportunity to be another person, to be a non-traumatized person, to make new choices. Isolation is the worst thing for a human being. It's categorically the worst thing we can do. Imagine being in your cell 24/7. This goes back to the reason why they're in prison. People are in prison because they're developmentally been isolated from their parents in some way or another. Either their parents worked all day and they weren't home to give them that serve and return that they need, or they were just flat out neglected, or their parents were alcoholics, so they couldn't give that kid the attention that they wanted.
And I think that's something, Fritzi, that you're so good at. You are very open and are ready to be vulnerable. And I've been watching a few of your interviews just in preparation to chatting with you today. And you are so open about your personal struggle and understanding your own behaviour and perhaps some of your own reactions in the past. And I think what you referenced was reading a book, which was The Body Keeps the Score by Better van der Kolk. And I will just read this. And I think what you said was that a volcano of self-awareness erupted inside of you and you began to understand the impact of your childhood trauma on your life. So I suppose what my question is can you just talk to us a little bit about this self-awareness journey that you were on and how it made you feel? Was it freeing? Was it empowering? Was it confronting? Probably all of the above.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind about this journey is it's a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to look at yourself and say, oh my God, what have I done? Oh my God, what's been done to me? And that courage it's basically vulnerability. And that's kind of what you're seeing when I talk about myself, is I'm being vulnerable. I'm saying to the world, look, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. You know, if you don't like that I'm talking about my trauma, I'm sorry. If you don't like that I'm calling you out on your trauma, I'm sorry. But those are the risks I'm taking. And I really want people to be able to take, you know, seeing me as an example, to be able to take a step towards their own vulnerability. Those risks, you know, the other part of that is you have to risk losing a relationship. You have to risk, but that's reclaiming your authentic self, which is what Gabor Mate says. He says, you know, you're either, growing up as a child, especially a traumatized child, you have to either be authentic and say, I want that cocaine, or you have to do what you think your parents will appreciate or condone, and not talk about your needs. And so you suppress your authenticity in order to have attachment, and in order for your parents to take care of you. And, you know, I've been doing that all my life. It's just another example of how these are survival strategies.
Yeah.
This is how I survived in these relationships, or thought I had to survive. I thought I couldn't be authentic.
So something else that I just wanted to talk about, and we will come back to the concept of vulnerability, because I really think that's something we should tap into a little bit more. But just for the sake of our audience as well, Fritzi, you started your professional career as a producer and have produced series such as the Defiant Ones, which I believe won a Grammy. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And that was with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. And then probably since then, I would say that your power is truly sort of exploring this intersection between telling a story, so storytelling, and with compassion as well. And watching your 2020 documentary, which was Step Inside the Circle, which we'll link below. And in this, you and your crew went into Lancaster Prison in California, and you invited 235 incarcerated men to gather in this yard and join your compassion trauma circle. So what my question is for you is just where this journey for you began, what inspired you, what was the inspiration behind creating this incredibly moving and powerful film, which you managed to beautifully encapsulate within, I think it was 6 or 7 minutes, if I'm right.
So the journey began when I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And once I realized my behavior was not who I was, that all of the ways I was betraying myself and betraying others was a result of my trauma. It changed my life. It started, you know, it was a month after I read that book. I walked into a prison, and all I saw were people whose behavior, they had betrayed others and they had betrayed themselves, just like I had. And so walking into that prison, I was like, what we're doing is so opposite of what needs to be done here. It's just, it's opposite. And I mean, it's basically like the people in prison are really like children. They're developmentally like children, and they need to be basically say, you know, we need to take them in and say, what happened to you, my friend? What's going on here? Not like, you know, bend over, cough, you know, here's your blanket, go in your cell.
Yeah.
That old behavior is, you know, it worked for us for a time, but it's not working now. And to isolate them, and to, you know, it's managing a prison and creating a structure in a prison. It's such a huge problem. You've got officers, you've got food, you've got recreation, you've got all these moving parts that have to be done efficiently and have to be done safely. I get that this is a behemoth thing, but the key here is that everybody in prison is going home. And I spoke with Ezra, who's been in isolation for 9 months, and he is having a hard time just wanting to talk to anybody. He doesn't feel safe anymore interacting with other people. And that's what's happening with people in Scotland all over the place. They're either at each other's throats or they're afraid to even connect. And that was kind of like, those are the two dichotomies that I had. And when we sat with them and brought them together, they started feeling better. you know, the brain needs connections to make connections. We're tribal social creatures. How many developmental milestones have been missed because of trauma in Scotland? Just having a parent that's an alcoholic is so traumatic. And so if we're looking at that, we're looking at this one ACE that Scotland is dealing with is destroying the brains and the wiring of the children of our next generation. And as Gabor Mate says, not why the addiction, why the pain? What's the pain that we're covering up? And I would say a lot of us are covering up that abandonment we felt, the love we didn't get. I realized my behavior wasn't who I was. And if I'm gonna excuse myself for my behavior, then everyone is excused. Everyone is excused.
Yeah,
everyone
deserves it.
Everyone, from the people who write policy to the people who execute these policies, to the people who've committed crimes, we're all excused. But now that we know better, we do better. And we're at that place where we are starting to know better. And it's time that we all do better. All the judges, you know, in the US, judges basically play God. I mean, all judges kind of play God, but in the US, judges say, thou shalt die now. You're going to die. You're going to die because I decide that. Where in your life, Mr. Judge or Miss Judge, have you done wrong to another human? Where have you done wrong? It may not be murder. It may not be rape, but you are human. Therefore, you are not exempt from this.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there when you talk about this sort of loss of humanity within, especially the justice system. And something that I found quite striking within the Step Inside the Circle documentary is that a man had said, to walk in the circle like that and to take each step forward was a reminder to ourselves that we still have humanity and we want to be loved. And I just thought that quote was so striking because this man just simply describes a human need, a very basic level human need, which is one that's been totally stripped away from him through his childhood, the justice system, and now in prison. So I think what you're doing in pointing out this dehumanization is so powerful.
Well, and you're talking about a man, he says later, he talks about his trauma later on in the circle, and he's been hit with a 2x4 in his head that had nails in it. He's been in foster care most of his life, raped, abused. I mean, the fact that he's alive and can speak in complete sentences is a miracle. And I write to him, he doesn't write back, and I don't know why he hasn't written back, but he's one that has really touched my heart. And there's a few people that I just take under my wing, and I don't, not physically, but I write to them, or I try and nurture them. Like this man I met on death row yesterday, he was abandoned when he was 6 years old and was left to wander the streets by himself until he was 12. And so his nervous system is a wreck. He's wringing his hands, and he's not, he smiles all the time. But I think that's one of his strategies, was to just smile so people would feel loving towards him. But I was told he's never speaks to anybody, and this was one of the first times he's ever spoken to somebody. And so this is we're dealing with some unimaginable things that people have been through. Yeah. Unimaginable. I mean, we're horrified by what he's done, but we also have to be horrified by what we've done. And this is the fine line that we're not walking across. We're not saying, yes, he did something bad and we're doing something bad, and I take responsibility, because until this is resolved, we're still responsible as a society. I don't care if it's in Scotland or Kenya or wherever this is going on. What happens to me happens to you. When you're successful, when you're thriving, that makes me feel better. That gives me relief. But when I know somebody's being tortured, like they are in Texas death row, they're completely isolated. I know part of me is not whole. Part of my universe is corrupt and wrong. Yeah, so,
and I think it's something that you said during the trauma summit recently was we may be inmates, but we are humans first, which is such a simple sentence. But I think there's this almost pride of dehumanizing people that are in the prison system.
Well, what's so funny about that is that's a criminal mentality.
Yeah.
That's, you see someone acting out violently. They're committing a crime, they're committing a harm. But then to take pride in it, to be righteous about it, to be excited about it. First of all, you're getting dopamine into your system. Violence and rage is another thing that releases endorphins into your system. You get you get a hit from being violent. And also, there's other mechanisms that gear us towards retribution and punishment. But there's also the other endorphins of love and compassion are so much stronger. And the thing about violence is it destroys your immune system. The thing about love, it increases your life expectancy. So when we isolate others, even though it just makes sense on a mechanical level, like, yeah, they need to be here because these guys have to, whatever the justification is, we know deep down what we're doing is wrong. We know deep down this isn't working, that the people are not better because they've been to my prison. If we know that, then there's room for improvement. And I hope that Scotland hears these words and not take it. It's not a criticism. It's more of just a please. It's just like a plea. Imagine your child is going to your prison. What would you do? What is the exact thing you do? And apply that to every single person in there. Oh, I went to McGilligan prison after I visited Scotland. Right. Some of the guys who have proved their safety, that they're not going to do any shenanigans, they have keys to their doors, and they're allowed out in their little area until 10:30 or 11. So they don't have to be cooped up in their cells. They have a ping pong table in their area, and they're allowed to, they do their laundry. But all these things rewire their brain. And this is these old patterns, old wiring that the people in prison have can only be changed the only way with new wiring and new connections. That's called pro-social. But so antisocial creates, if you put somebody in isolation, if you ignore them like they were as children, that creates an antisocial personality. If you nurture them, give them things to do, get their minds busy, keep them in their cortex, that's a pro-social personality. Then those people go back to the communities ready to roll, and I don't want to criticize the people in Scotland, but I want them to know, I know they're doing their best. I know that they're advocating strongly for their prison residents, but isolation is not the solution. Full stop. That's it. I mean, it's destroying my sister. It's destroyed so many minds, so many great minds in prison. And that just doesn't happen in a bottle. It ripples out into the community, because that person becomes a weight on us instead of an asset. But I was very impressed with the personnel at Scotland. I thought, from all the way to the top to all the way to the officers and the staff, I thought they were advocates for the well-being of everybody in prison. I just think the coordination has to be rethought, and it's urgent. It's not like, oh yeah, in a couple of years when they get even 16 hours in solitary, we need to talk all the time with people. We need, hey, what do you think about this? I want to walk. Hey, I want to go over there. And all that is wiring, wire, brain on fire, right? That's what we want, because that's why people didn't learn in school. They didn't apply themselves because they were frustrated. They didn't get the attention they needed. These people they need special attention.